All right, good afternoon, History 1302. This is the supplemental lecture. This is the lecture for class that would have been held tomorrow. Unfortunately, got to go down to Houston for another one of those doctor's appointments, so I apologize for missing class. However, we'll get this done and get you ready for the final exam and for the optional exam. So, as a reminder, your optional exam is on Thursday, so we'll see some of you for the class on Thursday. Give me a second here as I slip away and pull the important information for the final exam. Final exam is on Thursday, May 4th, May 14th, excuse me. Thursday, May 14th at 10:15 in the morning in the classroom. So Thursday, May 14th, 10:15 in the morning in the classroom. I'll send all this out via email here in a few minutes after I get done cutting this video, and I will send you this link, and we'll be all square and ready to go. Also, I'd suggest that you have a basic overview. Read the chapter on World War II. Excuse me. Read the chapter in World War II as you prepare for the final exam. The basic material there would be appropriate: presidents, battles, more especially theaters and names and that sort of stuff. Generals. You just know the start of the war and the end of the war, all those sorts of things there. So just know a little bit about World War II. Some of it ought to be just common knowledge that you already have. So that's a good prep for World War II as best we can do at this point in the semester. And I'll leave that to your reading and writing, maybe a little Wikipedia, maybe a few other sources outside of your textbook, though textbook's probably your best bet. Okay, so when we last lectured on last Thursday, I stopped off in the New Deal. As I said at the end of the class, the New Deal did not end the Great Depression. The Great Depression ended because of World War II. It is important to remember that there was some hope and certainly some relief given by the New Deal, but it is also worthy to note that because of Smoot-Hawley, high interest rates, and half dozen other things, it seemed like the recovery never happened. And really, in a sense, never did happen until the guns of war started soaking up and making factories expand and go. And so it does beg the question, philosophically, does government spending, in fact, save people from the Depression? Does it save people from panic and misery? Or, in a sense, do you let the stuff unfold, let the damage of the economy work itself out, minus, of course, the banks, perhaps, and then let it come back on its own? And so it does seem that, at least if you want a robust recovery and high-flying economy, you might have to go through some low parts to get up. Otherwise, it seems like it's all kind of, otherwise, if you go through the New Deal path, it just kind of bumbles along. It doesn't go anywhere. But Franklin Roosevelt in 1936 got reelected, and he got reelected easily. It was a landslide. Most Americans, even if there seemed to be no full relief in sight, many Americans were satisfied with the work that Roosevelt was doing. And it kind of became a mantra that, in fact, in the Roosevelt, they called it the Roosevelt Coalition politically, that in the United States there was a group of Democrats that they're Southern Democrats, farmer types. In addition to that, sometimes liberals from the East Coast and the Harvard types. Perhaps now even you can start to say blacks. The black support of the Democratic Party was starting under Roosevelt. It'll accelerate beyond that. But the fact of the matter is that when you talk about the, give me a second to pull something up there. When you talk about the New Deal, it creates a coalition and it becomes the governing majority for the Democratic Party for years and years and years. Basically from 1930 or 32 all the way to about 1968, 72 perhaps, whatever the case may be. But about a generation, the Democrats were the majority party in the United States, and it's arguable that it's longer than that. So, you know, it is a sea change. The New Deal is not just economics, it's not just politics, but it is a sea change in how Americans vote and continually vote. If you think about it another way, is from 1932 until 1952, no Republican will sit in the White House. Or if you say it slightly different, from 1928 to 1952, no Republican is elected President of the United States. And for many years, with, I think, justification, Herbert Hoover and the Republicans will be blamed for the Great Depression. And I think that that justification centers on Smoot-Hawley. Smoot-Hawley, that horrible tariff, mixed in with everything else. It was just a mistake by Hoover and what happened. Again, that's not to say that the Franklin Roosevelt administration ended the Great Depression. In that sense, I think that the greatness of Roosevelt in the Great Depression is overblown and overdrawn, and I think ultimately detrimental. But the people at the time period loved him. They loved him. Huey Long was a blip on the screen. He was cut down by an assassin in September 1935. So he's really not going to be a threat to Roosevelt. Roosevelt is going to seek after and get a third term in 1940. Roosevelt had enough popularity. It was a unique situation enough, and perhaps just simply put, people are moving past the restraints of the Founding Fathers, and they are satisfied to go into to having a president serve more than 2 terms. And so Roosevelt's the first president to get that third term. And ultimately he'll serve, he'll be elected to 4 terms as president, though he never serves out that last term. He dies while he's in office. But realistically, in 1940, when Franklin Roosevelt is running for president, the question he has when he runs against Wendell Willkie is the question of war. Will the United States get sucked into and have to fight a part in World War II? And as I'd said before to you in class, the damage that the British had done by their insistence and their, frankly, hanky-panky hook and crook with Lusitania, with the rape of Belgium in the First World War, caused many Americans to say there ain't nothing going on in Europe other than what the British are just trying to get us to save them from the Germans once again. If the Kaiser's Germany was not that wicked, obviously Hitler's Germany was. And so the majority of the lecture today, basically, in the concluding lecture of the course, as I said, you'll have to read on World War II in your own textbook. You be prepared for that. But the fact of the matter is that when you talk about the lecture today, it's about isms. So really, in a sense, you have 3 great philosophies that pop up, or 3 great isms that pop up in the 1930s and the 40s. And it is, and I mean this in the fullest expanse of the word, the ethics of the word. I mean it in a moral sense. They are wicked, meaning evil. There is just no 2 ways about that. To say that they weren't evil or that one group was okay over the other, that's not true. That is just that's just wrong-headed and insincere. I think it's just unjustifiable and you can't support it. Granted, there are people who support these. Obviously, not people didn't just lay over for them. But the 3 isms that we're discussing today will be Japanese militarism, communism, and Nazi socialism, the Nazi Party. Nazism, sometimes called, or really National Socialism of Germany. All 3 of those groups will murder or kill people at an industrial scale, and they do it in different manners. So it's really, in a sense, a macabre study, but it's also, to me, a very interesting study to look at, how each of these groups work. And the first we'll talk about today is Japanese militarism. Just by hearing me describe it as such, you'd think that it was because the Japanese had a group of men and women who were committed to Japanese hegemony, Japanese strength in the Asian realm, and in a sense that's true. But the Japanese also had a philosophy that went behind and went through the whole structure, that the Japanese people were a superior race. And you kind of probably thinking, I've heard that before, and of course, in that sense, the Germans. You might say that about them, or they would certainly say that. The Nazis would say that about themselves. But the Japanese, as the 20th century unfolded, and as you work your way toward 1945, the Japanese are going to develop for themselves a philosophy that is based off of racial identity and, in fact, a hatred for those who are not like the Japanese. If you were a Filipino, if you were Korean, or if you were Chinese, or frankly, if you were an American, and you got caught up in the grinder of the Japanese army, wherever that you may come into contact with them, if you were captured by them, it could be very bad for you on several levels. Obviously, POWs could be maltreated, killed, abused. Others still will be just executed. Some will be raped. I mean, it's a nasty situation. When you talk about Japanese militarism, and the worst possible example about this that you can think of, and there are others out there, the Bataan Death March. You want some bad bedtime reading? Go read about the Bataan Death March. The Bataan Death March involves American soldiers who were captured after the surrender of Corregidor and Bataan Peninsula in the early days of World War II for the United States. This army is going to be, what's left of it's going to be marched north, and many of the men will die along the route. It's a really horrible thing, and it's really part of the reason why American men, especially Marines, hate the Japanese in World War II. And actually that, plus the kamikazes, the suicide, the Harry-Carry, the whole thing that if you try to take a Japanese prisoner and you weren't careful about it, he might booby trap himself, set himself off, kill himself, and take 5, 6, 7, whatever Marines along with him. But that's from the American perspective, and Americans did not care for the Japanese. In fact, you can see it in the cartoons of World War II, the presentation of Japanese as rat-like creatures. And some of it also spills over to the Japanese internment of World War II in the West Coast. But it is fair to say, and I may have said it before to you in class, though the Japanese internment was not right nor correct, and in fact we have paid reparations for it. The Japanese internment of World War II, is not the same as the death camps that the Nazis or the Japanese or the Soviets ran in their heyday. They may not have been comfortable all the time. The food was adequate. The cover was adequate. Basically, as I understand it, it was not a pleasant place to be, but at the same time, you did not die of malnutrition, abuse, testing, and what have you. If you were a Korean in a Japanese internment camp or Filipino internment camp, Lord help you, you probably were going to be tested, if not absolutely worked to death or hacked to death. But when you talk about Japanese militarism and the associated barbarism that goes with it, the best example would be the classic story called the rape. It's not a story, it's an event called the Rape of Nanking. Nanking is an old city in close to the coast of China. And it was a large city of 1 million plus people, so if I remember my numbers are right. But it is a very large city, and the Japanese army passes into and captures Nanking. It was declared an open city, not unlike Manila, meaning that we do not defend it. It is laying prostrate before you. And then the Japanese army came in there and proceeded in an orgy of blood and violence against men and women alike. It won't take too long to say this, but I will go into some detail so you understand that, in a sense, the Japanese are not lesser criminals than they were the German Nazis or the Soviets. But it won't take too long. If you're watching this, and obviously you will be, you probably could even pause me for a second and type in Rape of Nanking and look at a Google image search. And there you'll see a man who's got his head cut off. He's Chinese. His head's been cut off. Cigarette hanging out of his mouth. That sort of stuff there. Japanese officers are going to have beheading contests. Some of the stuff you see about the news with ISIS or some of those other sorts of barbaric groups. They are not unlike the Japanese soldiers and officers who would take their swords, their officer swords, and see how many heads can we cut off in the span of 1 hour. Or 30 minutes. It's literally a contest. It's horrible stuff. They would take men, sometimes women, and would have bayonet practice with live bodies, how to work, where to stick, that sort of thing there. The Japanese looked upon the Chinese and other groups, but the Chinese in this case as subhuman and, in a sense, life unworthy of life. So you'll have that. You'll have women. By the way, Koreans, this is not Nanking, but Korean women will be treated by the Japanese as comfort women. In Nanking, women who are 90 years old and women who are 5 years old, I say women, she's a girl, and frankly just a toddler, but girls as young as 5 and as women as old as 90 will be raped, and not just raped once, but serially raped to the point where, believe it or not, a woman was raped to death. Over 100,000 people, in fact probably a little higher than that, will be killed, and many thousands more raped, mutilated. It is graphic and barbaric stuff, including occasionally women who will be pregnant will be gutted and their baby removed from them. It is man's inhumanity to man in the most graphic and gruesome of sense. The rape of Nanking is something worth your time. And if you're a man's inhumanity to man, if your understanding World War II's barbarism only stops at the gas camps of Auschwitz, you would do well to educate yourself better. I can think of one book off the top of my head. There are probably more that have just not escaped me at this point in the day that deal with the rape of Nanking. And that book would be Irish Chains, literally called The Rape of Nanking. Should be in the Blinn Library. So the Japanese will do these sorts of things with many people. If you watch the movie Unbroken, you see a glimpse of this barbarity and sadism in that movie. Or if you read the book Unbroken, you see it as well there with Louis Zamperini. So I would heartily encourage you to take a look at this to dig deeper in it. But Japanese militarism knows no bounds, and they are an expansive empire looking to push the envelope and push the Japanese empire as far westward into China as they can go, killing as many Chinese as they can, enslaving others. In addition to that, they're also looking to subjugate islands out in the Pacific, and frankly, of course, they attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941, and of course that brings us into the World War. The next group I want to talk about for more than a few minutes, in fact, it'll probably take me 20 or 30 minutes to do this, is going to be the communist. The communist. Sometimes you'll see them, if you've been by my office, there on my door is a poster. It says, "Is your washroom breeding Bolsheviks?" In the 1930s, Americans were worried that the Bolsheviks were everywhere and that the communists, aka Bolshevik, were getting ready to take over the nation. Well, that may not have been true exactly, but there were plenty of Bolshevik communists in the United States, and especially France, and especially England. But the mothership, the mother country of Bolshevism, is the motherland itself, the mother of Russia. They didn't call it Russia. They called it the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or for us, just simply the Soviet Union. The Bolshevik Revolution finds its intellectual underpinnings in communism, Marxism. The communist Marxist ideology is basic in this sense. It is basic in the sense that communist Marxism was believed in several things. Number one, that there is no God. First of all, it is important to understand that communist Marxism is an atheist philosophy. It is rabidly atheist. There is no God, and we are going, that as Marx said, the religion is just an opiate of the masses, and we're going to rip down religion, especially in this case Christianity, but other groups as well. We're going to rip down religion, and we're going to replace it with a state. And so if you ever look at the hammer and sickle, that symbol of the Soviet Union, in the sense that symbol of communism, the hammer referring to the industrial workers, the sickle of the field, the farmhands. Sitting over top of that is a star, the red star, or in the case the yellow star of the state, or the red star of the state as well. It is the supreme being. You may dethrone God in a sense here with the communists, but you will always have a God, whether it is God large G or a God small g. And in the case of the communists, their God was the state. In a sense, it was the man, but more especially the state, because they believed also not only in atheism, they also believe in communal property, hence the name communism. Different groups take it to different degrees. The Soviet Union, especially at its height in the 1930s and 40s, with Joseph Stalin as the master of the Soviet Union, there is no such thing in the communist system as private ownership of property, basically. Now, yes, there's a little bit here and a little bit there. And the idea is also that every man is created, in effect, equal. Every man is not only created equal, but he is adjudged as an equal. That no man has too much, no man too little, and we are all equal. But as one waggish individual once said, in the communist system, some men are more equal than others. But there is a communal aspect that we will all pull together, we'll all work together, and we'll all produce together, and we will overcome the capitalism that has dogged and kept down the workers and the peasants. So you have that aspect of it. And so, in a sense, who owns all the land? If there's nobody owning land, who owns the land? It's not just a nebulous thought. Somebody must own it. Or who owns the means of production, as they sometimes would say in the communist system. And, of course, that is the government. And then that begs the question, who really controls, who's in control? Or is it all benign and happy? Well, of course not. As Lenin himself said, and Vladimir Lenin is the father of the Soviet Union, I have to smash in heads to make my revolution. I cannot listen to weak music anymore, or said differently by one person. I think it was Lenin as well. Sometimes you got to break a few eggs to make your omelet. So when you talk about the Soviet Union, and economically it's communal, atheistic on the religion side, command and authoritarian in the government, you have no rights. Let's be clear about that. They may talk about rights, but effectively you have no rights. You can't complain against the government, or frankly the government will put you down or send you to Siberia. When you talk about the Soviet Union, and when you talk about its beginnings, it begins in 1917, but really catches hold in 1918 and beyond. The father of the Soviet Union is Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, L-E-N-I-N, Vladimir Lenin. And over the years, people have had the tendency to try to make him into a lesser of evil sort of guy. He's not so bad, they say. But then the more you read about it in the recently in the last 20 years, open Soviet archives, they were open for just a brief mention of time. But what we found in those archives is that Lenin often said, yes, kill a few more, yes, break some heads, yes, smash the enemy. And he's going to have people who do it for him. And those folks are called the Cheka, C-H-E-K-A, the Cheka. Now, the Cheka will evolve and morph into various organizations since after that. The basics go like this. It's the Cheka to the NKVD. NKVD. It's an acronym, Russian acronym for the secret police of the Soviet Union. And last but not least, they're known as the KGB. And there's other acronyms in there, so it's just sometimes hard to keep in contact. But first it's the Cheka, then the NKVD, and last but not least, the KGB. That's the secret police. Those are the fellows who knock on your door in the nighttime, or sometimes in the daytime, and take you away. These guys are true blue revolutionaries. They are true Reds. If you call somebody a Red, that means they're communist. So you call they were firm believers. They were tough. The first leader of the Cheka was a fellow named Felix Dzerzhinsky. Iron Felix, as he was sometimes called. That man was not afraid to kill you. In fact, that's one of the themes that you see with all of these isms. They're not afraid to kill you. But even if they don't kill you, they are certainly, a lot of them are sadistic enough to enjoy putting the screws to you, to twist the thumbs. They make the Inquisition look like a bunch of mom and pop organizations. It's not the same. In the Cheka, they will fight for the revolution. They will subdue the white Russians, which is not a racial term. It's actually a political term in Russia. And it is finally but surely by 1924, you're going to see the Soviet Union be born. And then Lenin is going to die. And then finally, by about 1928 or 29, you're going to see the rise of the new master of the Soviet Union. And that man's name is Joseph Stalin, S-T-A-L-I-N. Joseph Stalin. He was originally born as a peasant in Georgia, and on top of that, Stalin is his original name was not Stalin, which means kind of man of steel. His original name was Joseph Zhukashvili. Stalin has a Joseph Steel or Joseph Stalin has a much greater ring to it than does Zhukashvili. Stalin, to think about him, is the way he was portrayed, the way you'd think about him, you think he was 6 foot tall, 6'5", perhaps even 235 of muscle and mass, strong, you know, Big John and the Jimmy Dean song. But the fact is that Joseph Stalin was about 5'7". He's real short, even for the air. He's got a withered arm, but he's as mean as they come. And oftentimes you'll find documents and memorandums from Joseph Stalin go something to this effect. Pardon Comrade Borizelski, shoot 50 more, J. Stalin. And he'd do it again and again. Joseph Stalin is probably the second greatest mass murderer of all time. No, by the way, the greatest mass murderer is not Adolf Hitler. It is Mao Zedong of the Chinese Communist organization. Hitler, about 6 to 10 million people. Stalin, 20 to 30 million people. And Mao, somewhere around 100 million. It does not, in effect, folks, when you've got that many dead and that much blood on your hands, it doesn't how many million are dead in the sense that one's worse than the other. All three of them were horribly wicked men. Mao with his green teeth, his lack of hygiene, and his love of young girls. Stalin with his murdering of his wife, not to mention the murder of so many others. And Hitler with the camps. They're all wicked and evil people. But when it comes to Joseph Stalin, he will have henchmen all around him. In fact, paranoid, of course, and ruthless to the extreme. The man who's really his dirty man, the man who does really the heavy lifting for him, and Stalin's completely aware of what's going on. He knows what he's doing. His name is Lavrentiy Beria, B-E-R-I-A, Lavrentiy Beria. Beria is a real slimeball. Beria is a real slimeball. He's the head of the NKVD, that Cheka KGB, Cheka NKVD KGB organization. Beria will work his way to the top. He will, in a sense, kill his way to the top. He was a Georgian as well. And Beria is a man who enjoyed the company of women. And let's be honest about it, Lavrentiy Beria raped women on a regular basis. The way it would work kind of is if you were walking down the streets and you were an attractive woman there in Moscow, if a big black limousine pulled up, and somebody, probably an agent, would say, get in, and of course you had to get in. There was no, you can't invoke your rights because you don't have any. But then you got in, and before too long, Beria himself, he was in the back seat, will let you know what he was up to and what he wanted. And then after all was done, as you were tattered and you had just been sexually assaulted, raped, the fact of the matter was, you may think, well, I've got to call the cops. Well, he is the cops. Well, I've got to tell the world that I don't care what happens to me. You may think that. Beria would let you know real quick and in a hurry that if you told anybody and made a deal about it, made a fuss about it, the fact of the matter is that not only would you go to Siberia, which means go to the gulags, G-U-L-A-G, gulag, that you would go to the gulag, but also, so would your family, so would your brother, so would your sister. Those who were near and dear to you could also be sent to the gulags as well. And the gulags are in Siberia. So if you ever hear the expression, send so-and-so to Siberia, it's a historical joke about what happens to people who disagree with a corporation or a business or a person. Well, they'll just, if you hear someone say sarcastically, they'll be sent to Siberia, that's what they mean. The gulags in Siberia will hold many, many people, most of whom will face long-term incarceration of 20 or 30 years for crimes real or imagined against the state. Others will be sent to be worked to death. Many, if not most, will be tortured. The gulag prisons, and there's legions of stories about being caught in an NKVD prison. Or being caught, excuse me, I'm sorry about that. That's not exactly appropriate on YouTube television. But anyways, if you got caught and sent to the gulag, especially if you're a political prisoner, you could get into some real big trouble. And if you got around the wrong prison guard, God help you. The next story I'm about to tell comes from a book called The Bridget Andau. And it's actually from the 1956 Hungarian uprising. The Hungarians in 1956 were a satellite state of the Soviet Union, and the Hungarians tried to break away and reestablish their own independence. The Soviets crushed them. They broke them and broke them hard. When the Soviet boot came down hard. Well, this one man, that's Bridget Andau is the book. This one man tells the story to James Michener, the writer, about what he'd seen and heard in those political prisons. And folks, what I'm about to tell you could be found in Poland, which was later a communist state, in the Chinese communist system, or even in Russia itself, especially Russia itself. But really, the reason I tell you about Major Meatball is that it's the idea of this godlessness, this man's inhumanity to man. And just like the Chinese, or the Japanese rather, they were inhumane, so could the communists be. Major Meatball is a story that I tell, just kind of like the Philippine barbecue. When you talk about Major Meatball, the reality is that people make these references time and again. One of the basic tenets of communism is that differences between sex, differences between gender was all superficial and an artificial construct of society. That all people really are equal, period, in a story. So in a sense, that's why in the Soviet Army, the Red Army, you would have women who were snipers and infantrymen, whereas in other armies in World War II, women were never close to the front lines in that sense. So you will have women serving in places and what have you. And the thing about prison guards, it's important to remember, is that most prison guards are prison guards for a reason. Sometimes it's because frankly, occasionally it's because they're lazy and they can't get another job. But more often than not, if you stay and act as a prison guard, you're assigned a prison guard, especially in an army, a military situation. It's not because you are smart. It's because you are a bad soldier, or a bad soldier, a bad officer, what have you. You don't have any ability. You probably have a sadistic streak in you, what have you. Not unlike the bird there in Unbroken. Major Meatball was a woman, and people would say that the worst prison guards, male prison guards, were bad. Other male prison guards were worse, and women were the worst still. Major Meatball, she kind of had a rough go of it early on in life, evidently. She was pockmarked. She had a lot of acne all over her face, and so she did not age well. She was kind of plump and chubby. And so when she was a child and a young girl, people made fun of her. People were merciless. You know how kids can sometimes be, and she got it. But then she became a prison guard in one of the Hungarian prisons, and she had a reputation of being absolutely the worst. She was the sort of person who would walk into your room and your cell. When I say room, I really mean your holding cell. She would hand you a glass of yellow liquid and then demand you drink it. Well, you know as well as I do, it's urine. And you'd have to drink that piss. Why? You say, well, I don't want to drink that. Well, you don't want to go there. So sometimes you take the path of least resistance. Another time, this is another story, another true story about Major Meatball. She walked into this jail cell, and she took a piece of chalk and drew a circle on the ground. And she said to this inmate, who was a former Olympian who had escaped from I believe he was a decathlete or something like that, but he was a former Olympian. He had an exalted status. The Soviets always loved athletes. And so what ended up happening was they took this athlete, and Major Meatball knew him as a celebrity, not unlike Louis Zamperini. And so basically took a piece of chalk, drew a circle on the ground, and told this former Olympian, this former athlete, said, walk in a circle. And so that man proceeded to walk in a circle, and it's not a big circle, it's a fairly tight one. He walked in a circle for the next 13 hours. If this was in class, I would literally draw a circle on the ground and someone would start walking. But obviously you can't do that here. Now, when you talk about the last part, why is she so bad? Michener, when he wrote the book, The Bridge to Andau, said, I heard all these things, and I've heard these stories before. Rubber hoses to the legs, battery chargers and battery cables affixed to the nipples. You know, all those sorts of things there. He's like, I've heard all that. The man's inhumanity to man, that is a common thing. No surprise there. But then this last part is what makes Major Meatball so sadistic. And by the way, this is not designed to kill you. It's designed to torture you. As you remember from the Philippine barbecue, people don't die right away sometimes. In fact, they don't die at all occasionally. In the case here of this man, it was not the Olympian who this will be done to. It's the Olympian's neighbor, his next-door cellmate. And the Olympian got his fair share of abuse, but this other fellow, he drew the short straw. One day, in a kind of a quiet moment, Major Meatball singled this man out, this other fella out, and he said, she said effectively, I've got desires and needs, and you've got desires and needs, just those physical needs that only a man can fulfill. Can you help me out? Why don't we meet? Why don't we go to this area here, this kind of this broom closet? Why don't we go down the road? Not down the road, you're not going to escape. But why don't we go to the secluded area here in the prison, and you can fulfill your needs, and I can fulfill my wants as a woman. Help me out. So what do you say if you're that inmate? Yes. No. If you say no, you're going to be beaten severely to the point where you might get killed. If you say yes, you've got to be worried something is up. But hopefully it might work out okay. But you know deep down in your heart that it probably won't. The man telling the story to the Olympian, who in turn told the story to James Michener in the Bridge at Andow, said this. Said that the man went and he went to have that rendezvous with Meatball. And when he opened the door to this room at the appointed time, there was Major Meatball in all her glory, kind of leaned back on a tabletop with a come hither pose. And the young man walked in, went into the room and went to her. And then about 30 seconds later, maybe a minute later, a couple of guards came busting in, and Major Meatball, what's wrong? Major, are you okay? And she said, this inmate is trying to rape me. So they proceeded to beat this man severely, as you'd expect. Rubber hoses, truncheons, you know, the normal stuff. And at that point, it's not unusual. Then, and this is the graphic part, so you might stop your ears here and kind of skip for the next 30 seconds. But then they stripped him down naked. They took a glass vial, think of, say, an old glass thermometer size, and they shoved it into his penis, and then they proceeded to kick him in his genitalia, cracking that glass vial in there. Michener, as he was recounting the story, said, I've never heard anything like that before. And he said to the Olympian who was telling him he had escaped in the uprising, he said, how do you know this to be true? And the Olympian said, every day the man went to the bathroom, I held him up while he screamed in agony, because those shards in that urinary tract are not going to come free. And that's why it's the inhumanity of it all. It's not designed to kill you oftentimes. It's designed to make you miserable and to hate life, but knowing that you can't get out of it. You see stories like this from time to time, all throughout the Soviet system. Whether it's in the mother country of Russia itself or elsewhere, they were absolutely brutal. They were beasts. There's no two ways about it. From yanking and plucking out tongues in Europe and Poland, and they retreat against the Germans, to standing people on the wall and shooting them from one side to the next, lining heads up in a row, and because you only got one bullet, you need to kill 5 people. You've got to figure out a way to do it, and they did. A few years ago, about 10 years ago now, maybe 15 even, there was a movie called Enemy at the Gates. It's about Stalingrad. And oftentimes students think the most unbelievable part of the whole movie is that first part, where as they make the assault, the first wave have weapons and the second wave does not. And as the first wave falls against the Germans, the second wave were to pick the guns up and keep shooting. And then when they retreated, they were shot down by their own NKVD squads. That is exactly accurate. In fact, to give you examples how horrible the Soviets were, the only well, back up a second before I give you that last one. The Soviets outside of Moscow in 1941 had to clear minefields the Germans had sown. They took penal battalions, meaning prisoner battalions, and marched them through there to clear the minefield. At other times, this is the only army to do it. The Red Army did this, not the Nazis, not the Italians, not the Japanese, not the Americans, not the British. But the Red Army would take men and throw them out into the ditch, throw them out into the cold, and take them off of the ambulances. The Soviets, needed ambulances. They needed trucks, and the ambulances can work as trucks. And so the wounded were thrown into the snow so they could freeze to death and be discarded. Only the Red Army did that sort of thing. To be in the Soviet Union during Stalin's time was horrible. If you were what are called a kulak, K-U-L-A-K, a kulak, which is a Ukrainian peasant or a Ukrainian farmer, meant that you were either going to be sent to Siberia, starved to death, or worse, or just shot. In fact, millions of kulaks will die during the dekulakization, the Great Famine of the 1930s. Soviet collective farms, where everybody's supposed to work together for the good of the people, blah, 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 killed hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions. In fact, the famine itself, forced by Stalin, created by Stalin, killed millions of people. One of the common misconceptions is that Stalin and his boys, through the NKVD or the Cheka or whomever, were not interested in ethnicity. In fact, in one of the books that is behind me on the shelf, it's called The Bloodlands. The Bloodlands talks about this one Soviet agents making the statement, all ethnic minorities should be forced to their knees and shot like mad dogs. You would think a Nazi would have made that statement, but no, it was a Soviet NKVD agent. All ethnic minorities should be forced to their knees and shot like mad dogs. It is a horrible system that killed you or basically persecuted you or made your life a living hell. It's the Soviet Union, and it is one of the great killers and one of the great murdering operations in all of human history. They killed generals, they killed farmers, they killed city people, they killed politicians. In fact, if we were in class, I'd probably do this next thing, and I'll just tell it to you real quick. Stalin was paranoid. Most of those guys are, but Stalin always tended to kill those who might get too big and powerful. So what Stalin did next, in 1935, I believe it was, and then in 1936 again, the Party Congress would meet. And when the Party Congress, the Communist Party, would meet together in this great hall, people would be together and all that, and there's always spies everywhere. That's always part of the deal with the Communists. They always had spies hither and yon. And so Stalin, when he walked into the room there in the Party Congress of 35, like I said, I think it was 35, he walks in and then the crowd jumps to their feet and they start clapping like so, oh, Joseph Stalin, oh, Comrade Stalin, oh, hey, yeah, yeah. Some men didn't stand up all the time and keep clapping all the time. There were agents in the crowd and agents in the gallery taking notes, watching who sat down first, who quit clapping first, who wasn't quite as enthusiastic. When the Party Congress met again, those men were not there. Well, a few women too, but those men and women were not there. Those who were not clapping properly, who were not clapping enthusiastically, were no longer there. They had been sent to Siberia or drug out in the street and shot. So when you talk about that, next question would be, when do you stop clapping? I want to be the first one to stop clapping because there's people watching. Eventually what happens is Stalin will let them clap for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes. And then when he's done absorbing the accolades, Stalin would press a button or have one of his men, he'd give a signal, and they'd press a button which rang a bell, and the people sat down. The Soviet Union is not prepared for World War II. Stalin will not only purge the political class, the farmers, he will purge even the army. He will kill half of the officer corps and most of the generals. That's not a way to run an army. but that was Stalin's way. And he was a bloody man, a murderous man. What's last and kind of most funny about it, and this is the only way you can laugh, is that you know, the Soviets always talked about the fact that there was honesty in their system, and there was the greatness of the Soviet system. And by the way, there were a lot of Westerners from the United States, Britain, and France who believed that BS. Who said, yes, Joseph Stalin, that's right. I have seen, I'm quoting now, I think it was Lincoln Steffens who said this, I have seen the future and it works. Useful idiots, fellow travelers. Those people were there, did a disservice to the nation, did a disservice to humanity by getting into bed with the Soviet Union. Well, when you talk about the Soviet Union, and they always claim to be telling the truth. They always claim to be speaking for the people, to be that great and shining light, unlike the lying capitalists who are trying to destroy the world and what have you. The Soviet Union's newspaper was called Pravda, P-R-A-V-D-A, Pravda. And translated out, Pravda means truth. The joke was in some Soviet circles is that if the Pravda said something, if you said the opposite, if you thought the opposite of what the article said, then that was probably the truth. Pravda was a rag. It was nothing but often 100% lies, 85% lies, whatever the party line was. That's another phrase you hear. Whatever the party line was, that's what Pravda belched out. Pravda, meaning truth, was rarely that. So that's 2 down. Now we're at 45 minutes, 46:22 even. So here we are, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany. So the Nazis are an interesting group to look at as well. One of the things I'd challenge you to do, kind of like, honestly, the Soviets are the same sort of way, but even the Nazis are, more, to me, in a sense, more interesting. I would challenge you to not be swept up in the just two-dimensional cookie-cutter settings that so often is the case in when you deal with the Nazis. The Nazis, without a doubt, are absolutely fundamentally wicked and evil. Kill many people in the name of science, in the name of Germany, in the name of racial superiority, in the name of lots of things. Absolutely fundamentally wicked, the first order. However, there was in some cases there was a reasoning to their madness, a reasoning to their work. They didn't wake up one morning looking to kill people. They enjoyed it. They certainly wanted to do it. But there's more to it than just seeing what you might get in a simple Holocaust story. First things first, Nazi is a shortened term for National Socialists. They were leftists just like the communists, but one traded in international communism, that being the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Another traded in German nationalism thrown in with a whole lot of government control, i.e. the National Socialist. Of course, the leader of the National Socialist movement was an old colonel, a young colonel actually out of World War I, who won the Iron Cross. And that man's name is Joseph Stalin. Adolf Hitler. I got to get my right dictators here. Adolf Hitler was proud of his Iron Cross that he received, his first-class Iron Cross that he had received in World War I. Hitler is a interesting character in his own right. Probably asexual. He may have been a little bit active, but yeah, he married Eva Braun, but I've never gotten the impression that that really mattered a whole lot to him. Joseph Stalin never seemed to matter too much to him. He just liked his bootlickers and sycophants. And Hitler had his own sycophants around him as well, and he'd play them off against each other. But when you talk about the coming of the Third Reich, what is it that the Third Reich believes in? Amongst other things, the Third Reich believes that in the collapse of 1918, Germany could not have lost World War I because of a defeat of German arms. The German army could not be defeated by mere Brits or mere Americans. There had to have been some sort of conspiracy to take the Germans down. And so one of the bedrock principles of the National Socialist movement was that the German people, the German nation, the Second Reich, had been stabbed in the back, by capitalist, but more especially Jewish leaders and Jewish bankers. So when you talk about the anti-Jewish animus in the Third Reich, there's a lot of it right there, the stab in the back. They also believed that the government had not handled the army correctly. They had not given the generals the troops and the power to fight like they should have. It was all a conspiracy. And so how they fight World War II is, in a sense, a reaction against what they perceived to be gospel truth, that there were saboteurs everywhere in World War I, and that the army didn't get enough. And in some respects, you see how they handle the army as far as treatment of soldatens in the process. But the Third Reich, or excuse me, the Nazi Party, was not a very big party. In fact, in Germany, they are going to try to take over in 1919, and Hitler goes to jail and eventually writes that book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. But on top of that, not only do you have Hitler with that Mein Kampf business, but probably the largest political party in Germany in the Weimar era, Weimar to us, but Weimar era, is the Social Democrats. Those are the socialists. And a group that's right behind them, far more radical and far more aggressive, are the Bolsheviks. The Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party of Germany, is very powerful and very strong in the 1920s and late 30s. I gotta get my dates right. I've lectured too much today. 1920s and early 1930s. In fact, the Communists, the National Socialists, the Nazis, and the Social Democrats will all have their little paramilitary groups. The Red Fighters are the Communist group, and they are paramilitary. They are, hammer and tong sorts of boys. The National Socialist fighters, they're called stormtroopers, is known by the acronym SA, or SA. Sturmabteilung, the stormtroopers. They are large, and some of these men absolutely fundamentally, excuse me again, they fundamentally are going to love the job. If you haven't figured it out, you will in time. If you just have an observation of people, I don't have much interest in doughy-eyed optimism here. I just don't believe in that sort of thing as a basic kind of rule. But in a sense, though, there are always going to be people in society that will, if you gave them the opportunity. I'm sitting in front of my computer, sitting on a little old, it's a little old tabletop. Basically, you've seen them all over around Blend, but got that basic leg. If you gave them a table leg, there are people, maybe even watching this video right now, that if you gave them a table leg, if you gave them a lead pipe and you said, hey, you go fight, drink, and do all the things you want to do, and you get a get out of jail free card, you get a kind of a right to go do murder and mayhem, then by gosh, there will be people who will take you up on it and love to crack heads in brawls and what have you. The SA, and for that matter, the Red Fighters in Germany were those sorts of people. Almost all of them enjoyed a good brawl, a good drink, and a good, sort of thing. That's the sort of men who were in the Nazi Party and these other parties. The Weimar Republic, at the end of it, it was fragile, it was brittle, it was creaking, and it was collapsing. And frankly, folks, that is absolutely fundamental of the story. Who can gain control of the streets? Who can fight harder amongst the groups? They will brawl each other out. It's there. In the early 1930s, when Hitler runs for office for the Chancellorship of Germany in 1933, when Hitler runs for office in 32-33, the Nazi slate, it's important to remember, is that the Nazis do not go into the election saying, we're going to kill all the Jews right away. They don't say that. In fact, it's important to remember when you talk about Hitler and his attempt to take power in 33, is that when he was in the beer halls there in Munich, and some of you have been to Munich, Germany before, they have those great underground beer halls close to the city hall. Beautiful city. Munich is a beautiful city. And there, those beer hall put down there is where Hitler would meet. By the way, Hitler did not drink, he did not smoke, he was a vegetarian. Oh, by the way, the first formal link with smoking and lung cancer was not discovered by American, British, or French scientists. It was in fact discovered by German scientists at the behest of the German government, trying to figure out how can we get people to quit smoking. And oh, by the way, one other thing, some of the most advanced animal rights laws, some of the most advanced animal cruelty laws in the world, anywhere found in the 1930s, was found in Germany. So, but down in those basements, Hitler, though he wouldn't swill beer, though he wouldn't smoke a cigarette, though he wouldn't eat any wurst, no sausage, Hitler, when he spoke to them, those SA boys, when he spoke to those workers, those people who were his potential constituency, he could use some of the most nasty, brutal language about Jews and undesirables you could ever think of and would hear. He could be really nasty. But he, Hitler, in his own right, was a good politician who knew how to speak to his various audiences. If he was speaking to bankers, he talked about economy. The German economy was in the tank. How can we make Germany better? I can make you money. I can keep the communists at bay. It depended on who he talked to. Hitler was a very, he knew his audience, and he didn't say the same thing to everybody. Lots of good politicians do that. And one of the common misconceptions we have, partially because Hitler himself fostered this conception, is that Hitler, whenever you see him in those old grainy movie reels, he's yelling, he's got his face just kind of contorted, and he starts out slow, and then he starts to build up, and his eyes light, and he's really demonstrative, his hands pumping and his fists going like so. He does it on purpose. But one of the better movies that was made years ago, about now 10 years ago, gosh, time has flown on. It's called Der Untergang, The Downfall. If you like historical movies and you don't mind reading subtitles, and that probably lost most of you right there, but if you want to watch a good movie, go watch The Downfall, Der Untergang. It's in German. And the opening scene of that movie, that opening scene in the Wolf's Lair, and they're in East Prussia, where these secretaries are going to meet Hitler. And you see Traudl Junge. She is going to sit down at a chair, and she starts typing away like I'm mimicking in front of the camera. You can't see it. But she starts typing away, and Hitler's dictating a letter to her, and Hitler's got his dog, I believe he called the dog Blondie. But anyways, Hitler's there, and then all of a sudden she stops because she made a mistake. And you think at that moment Hitler's going to explode and like get a gun and do something to her. And Hitler walks up to her, puts his arm around her, and taps her on the shoulder and says, "There." Only one person evidently made a recording of Hitler when he wasn't the Führer, the leader, when he was kind of Hitler, the man. And he, in public, was very aggressive, but in private like that, he was very tender. What's interesting about him is that he could be very gracious to small and seemingly insignificant people. He could be very calm and collected. Now, that wasn't always the case. I grant you that. But the fact of the matter is that when you talk about Hitler, he wasn't always the cardboard cutout he is sometimes portrayed to be, either in the grainy films from years gone by or the movies you sometimes see today. And I really think when Bruno Ganz played Hitler in Der Untergang, that was about as good as you'll ever see. And it was spot on from my reading of history. But Hitler also, in a sense, made a deal with the leadership of Germany. And in fact, the leadership of Germany before Nazi Germany, they made a deal with the devil in the case of Hitler. That Hitler Hitler and his Nazis would help tamp down on, help tamp down upon the communists. What's interesting is that a lot of people in the elites of Germany thought that Hitler really didn't mean a lot of what he said. That his talk was that just for the consumption of others. And Hitler's political allies, and I'm not even talking about Nazis here, but his political allies thought they could control him. But in January 1933, Hitler comes to power. He comes to power by election. In addition to that, what transforms Hitler from being a recently elected chancellor to being on the road to the Fuhrer, and Germany becoming a totalitarian state under Nazism, is going to be what's called the Reichstag fire. The Reichstag fire. And it was then that Hitler starts to assume dictatorial powers, and that's when it really takes off. So one of the questions I've been prone to ask over the years on exams, especially the final exam, since that's where it kind of comes about, is this question right here. Which was the first group of people to get thrown into the concentration camps? What's your answer? Well, if your answer is the Jews, you're effectively wrong. I would invite you, perhaps put me on pause once again, and go look up Wikipedia. Look up concentration camp badges or something to that effect. And look it up there and see how the concentration camp badges were. They're not all Stars of David in yellow. Obviously, there are some that fit that description. But in fact, most of the concentration camp badges are inverted triangles, upside-down triangles. If you've ever seen a homosexual man or woman wear or have on their car have an inverted pink triangle, that is actually a historical allusion to the homosexuals who were incarcerated in the camps, concentration camps at some point along the route. But you will also have inverted triangles, black for, I believe it was the gypsies. In fact, actually, when you talk about the concentration camps, more gypsies die per capita. More gypsies die at the hands of the Germans than do the Jews. Obviously, the Jews in raw numbers take the cake, but a lot of other folks die in the camps as well, either worked to death or shot or gassed. But the first group of individuals who will be thrown into the concentration camps, and by the way, they're not mostly executed, some will be killed and beaten to death, are going to wear the red inverted triangle. And that red inverted triangle represents the communist. Hitler, for whatever he is, and of course he is a monster, he also understood he had to consolidate power, and what he had to do first and foremost was have to break political opposition. He had to break the communists. They were bigger in a sense than his group was, and he had to break them. And ruthlessly they did. They smashed the communists. They will drive them out of Russia, out of Germany. They will drive them into the stalags, as they're called, the concentration camps, the KL. It is a rather interesting look at what they did. I mean, other groups, by the way, Jehovah's Witnesses were very prominent in the camps as well. Not large numbers, but they were, because they would not bow the knee to the Nazis. Other folks went to the camps too. Asocial. In fact, the phrase I've used already once today called life unworthy of life is from the concentration camps. The German Nazis were committed eugenicists who said there is a survival of the fittest and evolution, and those who are weak not only must be not prevented from having children, but they also, in some cases, must be either killed or sent to camps and be kept away. So that the camps, the life unworthy of life, that is German. So let's see if I can get a little closer. The camps themselves, something else you need to keep in mind too is this, is that the camps like Auschwitz, and that's got a lot of satellite camps feeding into it, the final solution, all that stuff doesn't come about until World War II. In fact, when you talk about the camps, Germany just does not have a lot of Jews in it, and on top of that, they don't have a lot of people who would be thrown into the camps. I mean, we're talking thousands of people to be sure, but when we talk about the scale of the final solution coming out of the Wannsee Conference in the 1940s, a lot of that had to do with the fact that once you invaded Poland and you invade Russia, you're now having to create, as the German Nazis would say, we need Lebensraum. We need living space so these German farmers can go to Poland and start growing product in Poland. We can go to Ukraine and start growing product in the Ukraine, because the Ukraine's the breadbasket of that part of the world. It's the Kansas of Europe. We need space. And so what do we do with all these people? We can't keep them all. They're undesirable. They're Polish. They're Slavic. They're horrible. What do? We either enslave them, work them to death, or kill them in one form or fashion. The great killing fields of the Nazis get going after the war is on. It's not before the war. In fact, actually, one of the interesting things about the Nuremberg laws and all those laws about what you can do and can't do in Nazi Germany, a lot of those laws were predicated on your years of service in the German army. If you had served in the German army, say, had served honorably during World War I, even if you were Jewish for a while anyways in Germany, you had kind of a get-out-of-jail-free card. You had a trump card to throw. Here's my Iron Cross, first class. Leave me alone. And that actually worked till about 1938. But the whole of the German state is going to be organized, or the whole of the German nation is going to be organized around the state, which is organized around Hitler. From the SS, which is Schutzstaffel, which is going to be the real power in Germany. By the way, the SA is going to be decapitated once it became a little too powerful and a little bit too threatening to Hitler. And by the way, one of the men who's going to be in the head of the SA is a fellow named Ernst Röhm, R-O-H-M, with an umlaut over the O. Ernst Röhm is a very well, he's an open homosexual. In fact, there are quite a few open homosexuals in the SA at the very top ranks. But when they call the Night of the Long Knives, and by the way, Hitler knew all this. He may have been anti-homosexual, and the camps indicate that certainly. But Hitler knew that Röhm was a homosexual, and that when some of Röhm's men were captured on the Night of the Long Knives, the doors opened to the bedrooms, and there was these SA men with their boys or their catamites or something to that effect. The point, though, is that Hitler will decapitate the SA. Röhm will be killed, all the others too, who are the leadership, and it will be the Schutzstaffel, the SS, that will rise in authority and rise in rank within the system and within the state. And quite honestly, when you talk about the Schutzstaffel going up and the SA going down, Heinrich Himmler will be the next man up. One thing that's often overlooked with regard to the German Nazi movement, the Nazi state, is they were also atheist as well. One of the men who was very close to Hitler from effectively the beginning to the end, from 33, and he got a little more, he got closer into the inner circle by 35, I'd say, but all the way basically to the end when he commits suicide. One of the great scenes of that movie, Der Untergang, is when Hitler kills himself and then Magda Goebbels kills her children. Go watch that movie. You really would do well to watch it from Netflix if you have that sort of streaming service or whatever. But Joseph Goebbels was a womanizer. He was a real strange man. Brilliant, but strange, but also wicked. But he also kept, because he was in the close inner circle of Hitler, he always kept a diary. And his diary was published some years ago. In that diary, what you found when Joseph Goebbels was he would talk about these late-night sessions. Hitler was, amongst other things, a night owl. He was kind of bohemian in that sense. Stay up to 2 or 3 in the morning. That's kind of the way he ran his life. Hitler, that is. Anyways, if you sat up and talked with Hitler, you kind of were in the inner circle. Kind of like you sitting up and reminiscing with old buddies or something. And when you talk about Hitler and his views on religion, sometimes Hitler is said to have been a Christian, but by the way, he's not. Basically, and I don't have the book in front of me. It's at the house where I got the quote from. It's an old Andrew Roberts book. But basically, it goes like this. Goebbels wrote in his diary after a conversation with Hitler that Christianity was nothing more than a deposit, and I think of a deposit more like an excremental deposit, a deposit of the Jewish race. And that when time is done, there will be a extermination, a cleansing of Christians in addition to the Jews. And then on top of that, Hitler believed that Homo sapiens also had no right to be superior and that over animals. There just was no basis for it as far as Hitler was concerned. So when you think about Hitler and you think about his views on things, he was very much He was very much a science-oriented guy. He was very much a philosophical-oriented guy. There was certainly no traditional religion in his bones. He had rejected it completely. Like I said, that's in Andrew Roberts' book, The Storm of War, and I'll have to go dig it up in the office and take a look at it again to get the quote just right. I forgot it today, so I apologize for that. But it's rather interesting to look at. So ultimately, on the road to war, with the Nazi state being built up, the Volkswagen, that little beetle or bug, as some of you may own, or you certainly have all seen, that is based off of a design by Hitler, believe it or not. In addition to that, the fact of the matter is when you talk about Hitler and the coming of World War II, there were probably a half a dozen times where had the Allies stood up at all and had tried to turn Hitler in 1936, they would have been able to stop him. Had they tried to stop him in 1937, they probably could have. In 1938, you have what is called the Munich Conference. Hitler, who meets with a fellow named, who's the British Prime Minister in that time period, a fellow named Neville Chamberlain. Chamberlain's I'd say Chamberlain is really one of those feckless bureaucratic types. And they do well when they deal with other lawyers, they deal with other bankers. But Neville Chamberlain did not deal well with other men like Hitler. Hitler was a man of action. Hitler was a man who, I don't know if he respected anybody, but he certainly understood strength and he could smell weakness. To be honest, most Brits, most Frenchmen, most everybody in Europe was still tired from World War I. They remembered the war to end all wars. Oh my gosh, what can we do to avoid war? And so in that sense, it's understandable. But Munich in 1938, basically we shall have peace in our time. That is one of the great appeasements, and is oftentimes held up in history as why you don't appease dictators. Sometimes you have to do appeasement because war is not the option at that point in time. But Hitler was emboldened by Munich, and they should have acted. Winston Churchill said we should have acted, should have done something. If we'd have stopped Hitler here or earlier, this awful vortex would have not have swirled and sucked us all down. But Hitler himself said it about Chamberlain. He said it, I believe it was to Goebbels in one of those late-night chat sessions, or maybe it was to Goering, the Luftwaffe chief. He said, I met our enemies at Munich. I came to know our enemies at Munich, and they are tiny little worms. I came to know our enemies at Munich, and they are tiny little worms. Hitler had no respect for them. He had no respect for the communists. He figured if I kick the door into the Soviet Union, the rotten facade will fall down. It is an interesting time to look at. And in 1939, September of 1939, World War II begins. Hitler invades Poland. There had been a partition pact between the Soviet Union and Hitler, and the Poles were left out in the cold. No, the Poles did not charge German tanks, but the Poles were in over their heads. They were carved up and cut up like Thanksgiving turkey, and then the Soviets are going to slaughter the Poles in massive numbers. Then Hitler and his men will slaughter the Poles in massive numbers. On and on I could go. On and on I could go. So if you've been with me now, it's an hour and 12 minutes into this lecture. Here's what I would tell you to do. When we have the optional exam on Thursday, if you have watched this all to this degree and you plan on taking the optional exam, great, I'll see you. But if you've watched this video all the way to this point in time, and you plan on not taking the optional exam, that's fine too, but I would give you this option here, this little incentive. Come by the classroom on Thursday and bring me a piece of paper. And on that piece of paper, I need you to have about 4 or 5 dates. The first date would be, let's see, what is the day that World War II began in Europe? That'd be number 1. Number 2, what is Barbarossa? You answer that question. You don't have to use too many sentences, but what is Barbarossa and what date did it begin on? Number 3, let's see, when is Pearl Harbor and what day is Pearl Harbor Day? Number 4, when is, I guess what they call VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. What day is that? And last but not least, what is VJ Day and what day is that? You just write those things up, bring them to me on a piece of paper, and I'll give you about 10 points out on your final exam, 150-point final exam. So you do that, bring it to me in class on optional exam day, and if you don't take the optional, you can just go on and leave, but just bring it to me with your name on it, and I'll put it in the notes. Probably will leave something like that on your exam. So hopefully you've watched it all this way. Hour and 13 minutes. Alrighty, that's good enough place, and we'll stop. If you got any further questions, feel free to email me. Thank you.